Hey, so I've just tried something a little bit different on TikTok. I've just posted 10 videos of 10 steps to teaching reading with phonics. But what I've just done here is that I've stitched those 10 videos together, and this is what this post is. So it's about 30 minutes. But if you want to see individual posts, then I have made a playlist. So I'm trying that out. I've made a playlist and you can watch each one. They're about 4 or 5 minutes each, and hopefully they're in the right order. Or you can watch this whole video, which is about 30 minutes, and save it or share it. But if you're a homeschooler or homeschooling parents or foreign students who wants to learn better English, then this may be of interest to you. Thank you. Hey, so today I want to share 10 steps or 10 tips that you can use to be really successful in teaching your children to read. So I have used everything I'm sharing, I have used myself to teach my children to read some decade ago, but they could all read by the time they were 4 or 5 with no problem, with understanding. And I'm really certain that if you work at it and put them into effect, it will actually be successful. And as an extra tip, I've actually come across a channel on TikTok called Reading Made Easy, which has got over 1.5 million followers. And that channel has thousands of videos to practice phonics, purely practicing phonics. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give you tips on getting started with it, and then it might be very useful to use that channel for more and more and more practice. I've put the link in the description. But the first step, here's the first step. What is a letter? Right? You're going to teach your child to read. What is a letter? Right, well, I'm going to use this dictionary. So very simple. You can get hold of this dictionary. This is a Macmillan Children's Dictionary. It's actually available in the UK and also in the US. So as you know, I have over 100 dictionaries behind me. But here, let's look at the simplicity of what we're trying to teach to the children, or even to adult readers. It doesn't really matter, actually. They're the same fundamentals, right? So what is a letter? Very simple. So a letter is a symbol that represents a sound in language. So obviously in English language or European languages such as French or Italian or Spanish, we tend to have mostly the same letters. Obviously in other languages, maybe Russian and Greek and other languages, the letters are different than the letters we use in our language, but they still represent a sound. That's the simplicity of it. That's a letter. It does come from the Latin word litera, which means a letter. Then the next step, what is an alphabet? Because let's think about it. You're trying to teach your child to read. You're going to start doing phonics. And you don't even clarify what a letter is. So the primary step that you have to take is to clarify the basic terminology with the activity you're doing, okay? So what is the alphabet? You know, and you clarify that with your child. The alphabet, very simple. The letters or characters used to write a language, usually arranged in a set order. Now, we're used to letters, but now, for example, if you take Korean, I would call these characters from my point of view, although perhaps from Korean point of view, they're letters. But I suppose as an English speaker, I don't see them as letters, I see them as characters. So we could, you know, discuss that or speculate on it. But the point is, it's a symbol or a letter used to write a language. And it actually comes from the 2 letters of the Greek alphabet. So the first 2 letters of the Greek alphabet, alpha and beta. And here it's got a nice explanation. It says the first 2 letters of the Greek alphabet are alpha and beta, which are like English A and B. In old times, people thought of Greek as being the first or most important language. So they named the English alphabet for these 2 Greek letters. Okay? So once you've cleared what a letter is, what the alphabet is, then we look at what is a word. Yeah? And the word is actually a very specific definition. What is a word? Now, a word, when we talk about a word in a language, is a sound or a group of sounds standing for an idea, action, or object. A word is the smallest unit of language that can have meaning when spoken or written by itself. So in English, some of the smallest words only have one letter, such as the word a or a, you know, a bird, or I, as in myself. In other languages, there could be similarities. There definitely are one-letter words in French that I know. So that's what a word is. And it can also be the group of letters used to write down such a sound. So the word can be spoken, okay, like it says a sound or a group of sounds, standing for an idea, or it can be the group of letters actually written down or used as a group of letters, and that's a word. Okay, like the word table has 5 letters. Good. And that comes from Old English, actually, from a base word, which means to speak or to say. So that's the first step, right? Clarify what a letter is, what the alphabet is, and what is a word. So now I'm going to do 9 other little videos for each of the other steps. So you can check each one out separately in the playlist I'm going to put on my TikTok profile. I'm going to put it under Learning to Read. I'm going to put a playlist there. Or you can watch the whole thing, which I'm stitching together right now. So here is step 2. Once you have cleared up what a letter is, what alphabet is, and what is a word, what is the next step in teaching someone to read and using phonics? Next step is actually understanding what phonics is, okay? And phonics is very simple. It comes from the Greek phono, which means sound or voice, you know, such as telephone, voice or sound across a distance. Tele means across a distance, by the way, like television. So phone just means sounds or voice in Greek. And in education, we're looking at a method of teaching reading by training people to link individual letters or group of letters with their speech sounds. Okay, so I'm using that dictionary here again, the Macmillan Children's Dictionary. Now, what is really important and is not always spotted by parents or teachers who are using phonics to help the children. If you teach the child the alphabet, or so we're going to learn the alphabet, so obviously make sure you clarify what the alphabet is. There is a difference between the name of the letter and the sound of the letter. And I'm going to use a really simple example with the word cat. Now, if, let's say, the child's learned the alphabet and sings the alphabet, you know, A, B, C, D, and so on, and you show the child the word cat, C-A-T. Now, logically, very logically, if the child has only learned the name of the alphabet letters, you're going to say, oh, this is cat, cat. It's going to get confused in his mind or in her mind because they've been singing C-A-T. So logically, if they see C-A-T, they will read it C-A-T. Logically, that's what would occur. So what you need to be sure is to make it very, very clear that the name of the letter is C, but the sound is K. The name of the letter is A, but the sound is A, although it can change, which is what you're going to learn. So it's a function of the letter. In the same way I have this pen, I can say the name of this object is a pen, but its function is to write or to use to write letters or to draw. So it's a differentiation which is really important. So if the student understands that the sound of a letter is not the same as its name, then this is a really important clarification to be made right at the beginning. Okay, so that's the next step is phonics. Now we're going to go on to the third step. So the third step or the third tip when teaching someone to read and using phonics, once you've clarified what phonics means, what alphabet, letter and word means, you want to establish purpose. Now it's all fine to teach someone to read, but they must have a purpose or a reason for doing this. When teaching a subject to any students, to just teach to memorize to pass an exam or something like that, it's a pointless exercise. The person, the student, has to have a purpose in studying something. And this is something which has failed to be established in most schools. You know, a person does math or other topics. Sorry, I was going to say other languages. And also other languages, actually, you know, they've got to learn German or French or whatever. But if they have no reason for it or they have no purpose and they don't intend to apply it, the student just won't really learn because they don't have a purpose in themselves. It's the same thing with reading. So establish a purpose. with the student. Even if your child is 3 years old or 4 years old, it doesn't matter. Even 2 years old. What is a good thing about reading? What could you achieve about reading? So let's give you an example here. You have a little book. This is a reader. Games we like. Now, by discussion, you can very quickly establish with a child a purpose to reading. You know, hey, look, if you can read, you can learn. And this is the objective of reading. You're learning to read so you can read to learn. Because listen, once a person can read with full comprehension and know what to do to achieve that full comprehension, because that's not taught in school, obviously, because we want to make, you know, they want to make robots in school. So you don't want to teach real comprehension or how to achieve comprehension. That's not taught. It's just enough to read. But we're not interested in that. We want to read with understanding, read with comprehension, with purpose. Now, when a person can read fully and know exactly what to do to achieve full comprehension, life is open to them. All of life is open to them because you can study anything. You can go, I mean, an example is myself. I was mum at home. I worked in a supermarket, Sainsbury's supermarket. Now, I had been homeschooled myself, but I could read very well and very well educated in that area. And obviously, a very big user of dictionaries, as you can see behind. But you know what? I decided I've got children and I'm going to focus entirely on raising them. But once that was done, I thought, tell you what, when I was a kid, I wanted to learn aviation and aircraft engineering. So I'm going to go and study aircraft engineering. And I went to university to study it without any lack of confidence, nothing of the sort. You know, because I know how to study. I know how to read with comprehension. So I'm just giving you my own personal example on this because I have done it personally. I went to study a university degree at 33. I have no secondary school certificates. I just self-studied everything I needed to self-study to get into the university, going to university, did my degree in aircraft maintenance engineering and combined with mechanical or aeronautics, and graduated at the first and got a job within 6 weeks. And I was 38 when I graduated. So I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet here. I'm just making you aware that many people, by the time they're 30, 40, they think, oh no, that's the end. They're not educated. They've got no certificate. They can't succeed. It's not true. It's just not true. If you can study, if you can learn, all world is open to you. The world is your oysters. So as you're teaching your children, you start right from the beginning and you teach them to read with comprehension. So the following tips that are coming up, and I'm going to go on to tip number 4 in the next video, you know, you just work at it. And I'm hoping the 10 tips I'm going to give you here will give you a good idea on how to get started. But comprehension, reading with comprehension, reading with purpose. Okay, so tip number 4 or step number 4 to learning to read once you've done the first 3. Now, the books that I personally used are available in the UK. I can't comment what's available in the US, so you need to kind of look around. But I use this company, Jolly Phonics. I love their products and they have several books there. And to be honest, I've got one missing there, but they have 7 books and you can get them online. I think it's about 20 quid for the 7 books. They're new editions. They have CDs that go with it, songs, all sorts of materials, which I think, personally, I think are very good. So the way, you know, if you look inside, they've got all characters and it's all done very nicely as a game. And you learn the sound, then you learn to write it as well. The only thing here is the writing is either print or capital, sorry. So if I would recommend that you include the cursive at the same time. So you would have to print individual sheets or get a cursive workbook for this, so that as your child practices the letter sound as well as the writing, they're practicing in print, capital and cursive. So you just kind of kill many birds with one stone. I really like, you know, you have all sorts of practice, you know, with handwriting, with holding a pen, whilst you learn the letter. Now, I have used all these with my kids. It's worked a treat. It really has worked a treat. So I would suggest this as a tool. That would be really, really useful. And the other tool that I use from Jolly Phonics is the Jolly Phonics Dictionary. And this is a fabulous product, truly fabulous product. It's about 12 quid. And I'm going to go over it in the next tips, my next videos of how useful it is. But I'm going to show you here. It is a fantastic first dictionary to go with the books, because dictionaries are an essential, absolutely essential tool when teaching someone to read. And I'm going to discuss this a bit more in the following tips. So tip number 5 when teaching someone to read using phonics. One of a fantastic tool to use is plasticine or Play-Doh. Now, if you're on a budget, there are dozens of recipes online to make Play-Doh with flour, a couple of other ingredients, and some food coloring. And obviously Play-Doh, then you keep it in a pot so it doesn't dry, but at least it's inexpensive, and if it dries you just make some more. Or you can get plasticine. And here's the purpose of using plasticine or clay. Because letters are symbols, they're not as tangible as, say, a pen, you know, that I've got in my hand. So it can be quite a hard concept to get for a young person when they're learning to read, but even for adults that will work as well. And one of the great things you can do is you get the student to model, to shape the letter, and to actually write the whole word, or to just shape each letter. You know, you could do the whole alphabet, just do one letter, whichever way you want to do it, whatever level the child is at. And then you write a little label. You have them write a little label for each one. So ka, ate. That as they're doing it, as making the shape, you can have a discussion. What is the sound? Then you make the word, and then, you know, what is the word? But by the action of actually making the symbol in 3D, it does something. It makes it much more real to the student, and they can start sort of handling the objects related to reading. It's like in engineering, you know, very often we use 3D modeling. Well, you use 3D modeling on the computer, but it's not the same thing. It's not the real thing. So if you're, let's say, making a ship or an aircraft, you can 3D model an actual model to see the different parts, and it makes it so much easier. This is also used in architecture, I think, you know, where you do the models of the building, the towns, you know, you can see it. And this you can do with the letters and words, because you can see, like for the child, they can see it. It's quite a surprising simplicity, but I swear if you start using that, it will greatly improve the ability to read of your children or of those students you are trying to teach. So keep that in mind, and I'm going to go on to the next tip. All right, step number 6, or tip number 6, dictionaries. Right, here's a situation. You will hear that as a parent if your children are in school, or if you're homeschooling, you know, you'll have come across this. Oh, you need comprehension, you need to read with comprehension. The child is reading but doesn't have comprehension. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. It's not just children. I work in a corporate world, and I can have daily examples of adults who are reading without comprehension. It's all robotic. It's all automatic. There's no understanding, you know. PowerPoint presentation to a whole group of people, and people are like, yeah, they're nodding and all this, you know, and it's just a mess. It's just a mess. There's loads of acronym, abbreviations. There's no understanding, but, you know, nobody says anything. And I'm sure many people who work in such environments have experienced that. But how do you achieve comprehension? How do you achieve comprehension? What does comprehension mean? Comprehension means understanding, having clarity. If you're reading something and you don't understand it, well, evidently there must be some word that is not understood. It's a simplicity. Or the sentence is completely written wrongly, you know, like with bad grammar, so you can't understand it. But assuming the grammar is correct and the sentence is written properly, the only way you can fail to understand something is there must be some word that you don't understand. So let me give you an example here. Let's just say you have a book. So I'm going to use a phonics book, and just a simple sentence, right? Here you go. You have to do actions on this. Here you go. It says the puppy has a special piece of rag. It's got a little sentence here. The puppy has a special piece of rag. Okay. Now let's assume the reader doesn't understand special or doesn't understand rag. How are they meant to get comprehension? And that's why a dictionary is necessary. And don't go thinking that it is only the big words which are not understood, because 45% of the spoken or written words in the English language are actually the small common words of the English language. That is the word to, down, up, of, off, with, on. All the small words, about 100 of them, make up about 45% of all spoken or written English. And did you know that, for example, the word to, T-O, has over 20 meanings in a dictionary? Altogether, those 100 small common words probably share around 700 definitions. And do you honestly think that everybody knows the definitions? I happen to have studied the definition when I was a teenager, because so not that I remember all 700, but I know that they're there. So to assume that the person knows what the word the means, what does the word a mean, what does of mean? Even ask yourself as an adult, could you give the 20 meanings of the word to? Can you give the 7 meanings of the word the? See? I'm going to do several posts on that subject of the small common words, because that's the whole topic. But what I'm trying to say here is when you're teaching to read, you have to use dictionaries. And when you want your child to have comprehension, once it can read using phonics, if they don't understand, then there's a word that they understand. So find out what it is. Ask them, what does that word mean? Do you understand what that word means? Don't have them guessing. Do not ask them to guess. This is my next tip. So tip number 7, you need to go back to all the first 6 tips here to keep up. Tip number 7, never ever ask the student to guess what the word means. Now, if any of you have watched my earlier videos, like back 2-3 months ago, I made a video on the original meaning of the word literate. The original meaning of the word literate meant to be very educated and very knowledgeable in reading and the sciences. It never meant being able to read and write. That was a given, yeah? But in order to be cultured and educated, it's assumed that you understand what you're reading, okay? Now, so in those days, when you look back, to be really learned, you would have to understand what you're reading. You would have to research what things mean. But back in the 1900s, as I explained in other posts, we had the rise of modern psychology. We had James Cattell coming back to America from Germany, having studied with Wundt, the psychologist Wundt. I need to go and look at all those videos. Came back to America, declared that phonics was a waste of time, that people shouldn't learn that way, and basically started a whole movement to reduce IQ and educational ability and ability to learn and ability to think for yourself. In fact, James Cattell even set up the first company that delivered psychological testing, which I will do a separate post on. But anyway, the point is around 1920, 1930s. Then came a raft of psychological university essays. You know, everybody becomes an expert in psychology. You know, the subject has not existed for thousands of years. It suddenly pops up at the end of the 1900s, and then suddenly within the 20 years we have all these experts. But what happened was these theories were being put out that a student should guess what the word means. They should look at the context, so the words around, you know, what they're reading, and guess what the word means. And it is completely false. It is the opposite of what you should do. That is a sure way. Getting a person to guess, which is, by the way, what is done in all UK schools, because that's what teachers are being taught to do. Asking somebody to guess what a word means is a sure way to reduce their IQ. So if you want to reduce your child's IQ, if that's your purpose, then by all means insist that they guess. If you want to raise, beg your pardon, your child's IQ and your own IQ even, start finding out what words mean. Stop guessing what words mean. And the real way that you use a dictionary, so I'm going to use a nice simple dictionary here just for an example, is quite the other way around. When the child reads something and they don't understand it, there's no comprehension. So you as a parent, you go, okay, so you check what the words mean. So let's say in the example that I gave you, there was a rag. So you would then, the child doesn't know what a rag is. So then you would look for the word rag. And obviously this is a very simple dictionary. And there will probably be just one definition. And there is just one definition, so it's easy. So rag, a little piece of cloth usually for cleaning things. Yeah, it's just there. So then you can clear that up very easily with a child. Obviously at 3 years old or 4 years old, they may not be able to read the dictionary, but it doesn't matter. You do it with them until they start learning. I will make a full set of posts of how to use a dictionary, so you can learn that as well. Now, but when there is a word with several meanings, so let's take an example of rail here. We have rail. So even though it's a simple dictionary, it's got 3 meanings. In the larger dictionary, there will be a lot more meanings. So we have 1, a bar fixed onto something for holding onto. 2, a bar for hanging things on. 3, rails are the metal bars that trains run on. So that's a great example. So let's say you had a sentence, the children were forbidden to cross the rails because it was dangerous. Okay? And the child doesn't understand what that is. So you ask, okay, so you check what each word means, and you say, what's a rail? I don't know. Is a rail, is it like a bench? Good. So you would take the dictionary, and what you do then is you go through the 3 definitions, and you have the child look at the context and then choose which definition he or she thinks matches the context. It's the other way around. You're developing critical thinking. By guessing, you're just turning people into robots. You're going, guess what it means. Oh, it's like a bench that you sit on. Oh, okay, great. It's a bench that you sit on. Straight away, totally false. There will be no comprehension. What you're teaching a child here is you're teaching them that the moment they see something that doesn't make sense, they'll go, I don't know what that is. And very, very quick, children are very quick. They will soon get the idea that if they don't understand, there must be something they don't understand. So then you go through the 3 definitions. Obviously, once they're old enough and they can use a dictionary themselves, they do it themselves. But you would go, okay, so the children couldn't cross the rails. We're forbidden to cross the rails because it was dangerous. So then you read it out. Then you discuss. Which one do you think fits in? Look what's happening here. Look at the picture. What are the children doing? Cross the rails is dangerous. And they'd be like, oh, it's probably what the trains run on. But they would soon work out. So by looking at the definitions in a dictionary and the context of what they're studying, so perhaps the story is about children playing outside and they're looking at the trains. So then they would be able to quickly match the definition with the context. So what you're doing here, you are developing critical thinking, because the definition of critical in this sense is the ability to discern, the ability to evaluate different elements of a situation. It doesn't mean critical as in, foot finding, which some people think that's what it means, but that's not the definition. And I did make a post on this. So it means to discern, to be able to see the differences. So this is a fantastic exercise and drill that you can do, because it will very, very, very quickly develop critical thinking in your children. Okay? Ooh, we're getting on. We're getting towards the end of our 10 tips. So next post is the next step. All right, step 8, or tip number 8, to teaching someone to read using phonics. Once you've gone over all the previous steps, 1 to 7, so please look at the playlist or watch the full videos that I've put together. Find good readers. So the readers that I use for my children, which worked really well, and I'm not saying they're the only readers. You have like the Oxford Reading Tree program, which you can find in libraries, public libraries in the UK, as well as many schools, but you can get the books from there. But what I use were the Peter and Jane books. Well, we call them Peter and Jane. And we use those. They're Ladybird reading scheme. And it starts with 1A. So it goes very, very slowly, builds up, the gradient, builds up the difficulty. But I found it really good. So once I got all the phonics sorted and they understood, the sounds, we started with that. Very, very simple. Peter, Jane, let's say a dog, a tree, a ball. Anyway, that worked for us. It's got the picture to go with it. We used, the plasticine, all the tips that I've showed you before, we used. And step by step, we just went through the book. Now, some people quite incorrectly could use the look and say method. And the look and say method was the other method that was introduced originally in the States after the attack on phonics by James Cattell, and other psychologists like John Dewey as well as Cattell introduced this look and say method, which is basically trying to get the person to memorize. They look at the picture and then memorize a symbol. So they were not using phonics. They were not deciphering and, you know, using the sound to actually read. They were trying to memorize what the word, you know, what that word, just taking a picture of it literally and saying, oh, that's Peter. And then hopefully remembering it later on. But obviously the look and say method is incredibly destructive. And this has been proven many, many times. You should read that book on this. There's 2 books on the subject. Well, there's more than 2 books, but there's some very famous American books called Why Johnny Can't Read, and then Why Johnny Still Can't Read. So if you want to look into that, by all means do so. But the phonics method is definitely the best method. And I was discussing with other individuals, and actually some viewers put some comments on the some of my other videos on the subject. And countries like Russia use phonics. When I learned French, because I learned French sort of to read in French first before I read English. I don't speak so much French anymore now, but it was a phonics system. So I think in many, many languages, it is what's used. Can't comment on Chinese because they use a slightly different system. They don't have an alphabet, so I don't know how that works. But anyway, here we go. So, you know, using phonics, you just get through the books. And I found the Peter and Jane books to be really good, and there's 30 of them. And by the time, I think it's about 30 of them, and by the time I got to 30, all my kids could read with that. Then after that, you keep practicing, obviously. So, ready for the next tip. Okay, so tip number 9. This is more like a piece of information that will help particularly maybe foreign students who are trying to learn English, but also for parents, and also to obviously answer the questions when it comes to from the kids. English language, right? So I'm just giving 3 examples here. We have tough, through, and though. And we have group of letters which change in pronunciation, in sound. So here we have tough, through, where we don't say at all, and though. And you know, why a lot of people wonder, you know, but you know, it's GH, you know, why is it there, why is it not there in this instance? And the simplicity of it is English is a mix of Germanic languages, Norse languages, so this is from Iceland and Scandinavia. It's a mix of Latin, Greek. It's a huge mix, plus the original language of English, the Celtic that was spoken here, you know, before Romans came along. So there are so many words. A lot of the pronunciation changes because of the etymology of the word. So it depends where the word comes from. And this is the issue. So there is nothing to get upset about. It is just the awkward nature of the English language that so many instances, you know, you learn to do a sound, you know, you put 2 letters together and you learn a particular sound. You go and, you know, read it, and then suddenly you come across a word where it's not pronounced that way. And it can be very, very frustrating and confusing, going, oh, wait a minute, you know, you say that's that sound. Yes. But there are exceptions, and the way to go through that is very simple. And this is another reason why you need dictionaries. And I'm going to show you this here. Or did I move my other dictionary? So, oh, it's there. This is why dictionaries are so useful, because pronunciation is in the dictionaries. And so you have good dictionaries should have pronunciation keys. Not all of them have it, actually, to be honest, which is not really good. But normally, most good dictionaries will have a section, which I'm looking for here. This is a children's dictionary. And you see, you will have a whole section. And this is particularly for teaching. This is a teaching dictionary, so it's a lot more. So you will have an entire section with a symbol, a very specific phonics symbol, which tells you what the pronunciation is. So this is something you have to learn to use, which I'm going to cover in my series on how to use a dictionary. So I will show you how to use the pronunciation keys in dictionaries. But the point is, all good dictionaries will have a pronunciation key. So when in doubt, it's very simple. When in doubt, you go to a dictionary, you find the word, and you look at the pronunciation key, and it will tells you how to pronounce that word. And rather than get upset about it, recognize that these differences between words, even though they have the same spelling or they have the same group of letters, which should sound the same and don't sound the same, is really to do with the etymology of the word. That is where the word comes from, the history of the word. Nothing else, I think. I mean, that's my simplicity of it. I don't think there's more complications to add. I'm sure a linguist will add a lot more complications to it or history to it. But the simplicity is go and look in the dictionary, find out what the pronunciation is, and that's what it is for the word. And if you want to know more about it, then obviously use the internet and find out why that word is pronounced that way. But that's the simplicity of it. All right, one last tip. So my last tip, number 10 tip, is once you've done everything else before that I've discussed in tips number 1 to 9, then it's a matter of practice. Practice with understanding. So you practice, you have the person read more and more, slightly harder readers, you know, go step by step, because usually reading programs are sort of graduated in a very, very slow sort of slope. You know, it's kind of slowly, book by book, there's extra words added, and it kind of gets better and better and better and harder and harder and harder. But the important thing is to always look up the words. So you not only have your student read, but every time it's getting confused, he or she is getting confused, good. Find out what word he or she doesn't understand. And don't think it's the big words. It can be to, the, on. Remember what I said in my earlier post. Small words of the English language, which are about 100 of them, off, of, on, the, down, up, out. All these words make up 45% of all spoken and written words in the English language, with some of them like to or of having well over 20 definitions. So keep that in mind. It's not just the big words, it's the small words. Then you practice, practice, practice. As I said, there's a big account on TikTok, which I came across because I was talking about phonics, called Reading Made Easy. And they've just got, you know, like 20-second, 30-second videos, thousands of them. So it's good practice just to practice. It's very, very short, just to practice a particular sound. But do that once you've clarified everything else and the sound of the letter. Then you can just practice, practice, practice. Practice makes perfect. One does not become competent by popping a pill or by a magic wand. Competence is achieved by practice. There's no other way around it. An Olympian does not become an Olympian by sitting down and hoping that they win a gold medal.